encourage your soul, enlighten your mind, and empower your faith. This is the Light Network.
Conversations about life, Christianity, and culture. Welcome in Four Preachers in a Podcast, the earliest episode of a podcast we've probably ever produced. I'm Robert Hatfield, and all of the guys are here with us live and in person. Brad McNutt from Moulton, Alabama. Hey, Brad.
Hey.
Hiram Kemp, Bowling Green, Kentucky.
How's it going?
Chance Hicks, North Charleston, South Carolina.
Hello.
We are coming to you from the Light Network Conference. I almost said Connect Conference. That's not what this is at all. From the Light Network Conference in Henderson, Tennessee. And we've got some people out here with us, and this is fun. And we're talking today about creating a culture of unity. The theme for this conference has been and is all about unity. We're studying John 17 in the conference. It seemed appropriate to take a little bit of time to step maybe away from just focusing solely on that context and to, have a session and thus a podcast of this episode of this podcast, an episode of this podcast on unity. There's a lot to say about unity. The Bible gives a very large emphasis on the topic and a culture of unity. I mean, unity is more than just a thing. We're saying it's a culture. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. I think there are the commands for unity where God tells us to do certain things, but then there is this, I guess the New Testament sometimes refers to the brotherhood of unity and that idea of being together and just creating an atmosphere where people come in, and while the Bible commands us to be unified, we're just drawn together and we desire to be in each other's company and in harmony and in peace with each other.
Mm.
Yeah, and you have the biblical instructions in the New Testament about being at peace. And so it's creating that constant state of peace and harmony in our relationships with one another. And so we want to make sure that that's true in our life, and it's true in the congregation where we are, that we're trying not only to be at peace with God, but we're creating this place where we're constantly seeking for peace with one another. And when peace is disturbed, we're trying to go and make reconciliation and resolve. And so you're just creating an atmosphere where that's the norm.
Mm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
It's not there's no such thing as having the absence of conflict. Some people look and they say, well, this relationship isn't healthy. It's got conflict. No, that's a sign that it is healthy. What it determines whether it is healthy or unhealthy is how you deal with that conflict. Mm. And can we resolve it and continue to love one another and serve and get refocused on our mission at hand? And I think of Philippians 1 when he says, look, I want us to stand side by side, striving together for the faith of the gospel. We've all got the same goal in mind, and we're pushing ourselves in that one direction.
Overarching passages. Let's sort of go through this. I mean, what are some of the passages that come to mind? We're going to get into, proactively how we create a culture like this, but just sort of by introduction, what are some sections of Scripture? I'm thinking Ephesians 4, but I've just been thinking Ephesians all summer long lately. Yeah. But, endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. And really, I think most of Ephesians 4, especially 1 to 16, is sort of giving us some guidance on how we can be a unified people, right? You want to talk more on that, or maybe go somewhere else?
No, I think you're right. And Ephesians 4, probably we know it as the chapter of the 7 ones, Ephesians 4 to 6, but it really begins with some attributes and characteristics and attitudes that are essential to unity too. Like, you can't just say unity is about making sure we have these 7 ones and that we all believe them and hold to them. Unity is also about the kind of Christian character in the heart of Jesus that precedes that in verses 1 through 3, right? That we would walk worthy of our calling with lowliness and long-suffering, gentleness. We're bearing with one another in love. And then that allows us to endeavor to make every effort to keep this unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. And so it's a heart disposition as well as sticking with and holding to the traditions of Scripture, the teaching of Jesus that's been handed down. There's 2 sides to peace and unity among God's people.
Speaks to those characteristics. Speak, Brad, to what you said a minute ago. I mean, unity can't be the absence of conflict. Otherwise, he wouldn't tell us to be humble and gentle and long-suffering and putting up with each other in love.
Right. I like that. Put up with each other.
I mean, I think that's the original Greek, right, Hiram?
I guess so.
Okay, good.
But the whole idea...
I guess so.
The whole idea of being unified in Ephesians 4 is also based on what God's already done. Like from the first 3 chapters, and then he says, God doesn't tell us to go out and create unity. He says endeavor to keep it or maintain it. Yeah. So based on the unity that God has already handed down to us, and he talks about each member of the Godhead in 4, 5, and 6, he's saying you all do your part and maintain the unity that God's given you. And as Chance mentioned, Paul leads off with behaviors before beliefs. We tend to go right to beliefs when we talk about unity. We can only be unified if we believe these things. But we all have known places where, again, everybody would check off the same answers on the doctrinal questionnaire, but that doesn't necessarily mean folks are unified. Paul says with all lowliness and meekness and long suffering, because you can have identical beliefs and still be at odds with each other and not be unified in the way God wants us to be. So beliefs matter for unity, but so does a heart disposition that says, I'm not better than you. We both got here the same way. We're on the same team, striving toward the same goal and serving the same God.
We almost need to unpack what you just said, because unity already exists in God. We're eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit and the bond of peace. So it's not just we all get together and decide to agree with each other. It's we're called to something that's higher than we ourselves are. John 17, where we're focusing in this conference, is really, I think, all about that, right? I and you, Jesus prays to God the Father, you and me, that they also may be one in us. So we're called to exhibit the kind of selfless, type of unity that exists among the 3 members of the Godhead.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think unity at the heart of it is the work of God, and we are just co-laborers and co-workers together with him. He's inviting us to this work of unity alongside of him.
So, do you have something, Hiram?
Well, I was going to say Philippians 2 is like a parallel passage to Ephesians 4. It's in that prison epistle section, and Paul says, if there's any consolation in Christ, any comfort of love, any fellowship of the Spirit. So he starts in that same position. Hey, and that if is more like a since this is the case. Since you have these things in Christ, fulfill my joy. Be of the same mind, be of one accord, and then he goes into be unified. I mean, even in a church like Philippi that we typically view as a upbeat, positive congregation that had things right, Paul's urging them to be unified, and he says, you do all of this because of what you've already been given through Christ. And so that's the motivation for it.
There is a segment of people who, if you get to talking about unity too much, people get a little nervous. I mean, it's one of those things like if you preach on love too much or if you preach on grace too much. I don't mean to dog anybody. I'm not trying to go down a bad rabbit trail. But why do you think unity can be a buzzword in some circles for questionable biblical activity? First of all, do you all agree with what I've said?
No, I'm just kidding you.
Hiram, come on.
No, you're on your own, Robert. You're out
okay.
I think some people equate unity with compromise unnecessarily. Like they think when you emphasize unity, you're saying let's all get together no matter what, throw off all distinctives as far as doctrines and belief, and just hold hands and get along. And so I think people have a misconception, and anything that's corrupted or counterfeit, people just sometimes run to an extreme. And that's the case with unity sometimes. Some people do emphasize unity at the cost of everything, and people that want to guard against that and hold to the truth of the New Testament and stuff, they think when they hear that kind of terminology, oh, where have I heard that before? Well, that leads to this knee-jerk reaction over here. But God's never in his word said, because people abuse X, don't you say X or do this or emphasize this, lest you be like them. He's saying you show them the right way and do it in a way that honors me. So
it's good. Brad, you look like you got something to say.
I'm good.
Ditto?
Ditto. That's it.
Chance, you want to add anything?
No, I mean, I think that because unity has been, people have been willing to dispense anything for the sake of unity, it can rub people the wrong way that you would pursue unity or think about unity or bring it up. But it's the balance of our goal is biblical unity, not unity for the sake of unity, right? Our goal is, here's the unity God has produced through Jesus and the unity of the Spirit, and our goal is endeavoring to keep that unity, not to create some false unity, but to pursue the unity of God and make sure that's the culture that we are living in and creating in our congregations.
I think sometimes we get off on the wrong foot because we misunderstand what unity is. We think unity is uniformity, where everybody is exactly the same. We're all carbon copies of each other. But the New Testament shows us in countless texts that we all come from different backgrounds and all different types of personality types, and we're all gifted differently. And so there's not going to be uniformity. That's part of the beauty of what the church is there is a great deal of diversity in who we are. And, the debate throughout the ages has been what is essential and what is not. But for some, what is essential is that you agree with me on everything. And if we're going to be united, we're going to have to, and we understand this, like in our marriage relationships and with our kids, we're not always going to see eye to eye, but that doesn't mean we're not united. And so I think sometimes we start with a faulty definition of what unity is supposed to be, and that then everything just kind of falls apart in our hands as a result.
Leave it to Brad to go there. First of all,
sorry.
you used another buzzword, giftedness, right? So you want to talk about that?
I just borrowed it from Paul.
Well, mic drop. Okay.
Yes,
Please
Romans
don't
12.
drop that mic. It's very expensive.
Yes. But this one is mine. So.
Yeah, that's right. It's been dropped before.
Oh,
it
it
still
has,
works.
definitely. I think of, 1 Corinthians 12, obviously, and in the context, he's dealing with spiritual gifts. There's no question about that.
Yeah, miraculous spiritual
Yes,
gifts.
but thanks for cleaning that up for me. But he deals with two fundamental attitudes, right? He deals with the attitude of no one person can look at another and say, I don't need you. And then in the second half of the chapter, he looks at it and says, no one can look at the church and say, hey, they don't need me. I'm not important. And so understanding that every person has something to bring to the table, and unity is learning to respect those differences and realize that you make me better by being around you. And there are things that cannot be accomplished without you, and that's Paul's point. Look, I don't know of anybody that has a beautiful portrait of an actual heart hanging over the fireplace in their home, because it's not a pretty thing. But I can guarantee you, nobody wants to try and live without one.
That's true.
It may not be the most beautiful thing in the world, but it's essential. And we need to appreciate that about people, that sometimes there are differences, but they're also essential.
12 apostles are probably a good example as anything, right, of this. They were extremely different people. Jesus handpicked them. It's not like they were the only 12 people around. It seems to me that when he called the apostles, he gathered together to whatever degree the multitude of disciples there were at that point in his ministry, and selected from among them 12. It almost seems like there was some intentionality there. They were not natural friends.
No.
But you have probably, we've been talking about John 17 being the longest recorded prayer of Jesus, but maybe the longest prayer he ever prayed is Luke 6 prior to the selection of the 12, where Luke records that he spent all night in prayer to God. So it definitely was an intentional selection where he spent all night praying about. We're not told specifically what he prayed about, but just contextually, he spends all night in prayer, and then the very first thing he does the next morning is call everyone together and select 12, leads you to think that that's what he was thinking about and communicating with his Father about, this intentional selection of 12 people who, in other courses and places of life, aren't going to be unified. They're not going to come together. They're not going to have peace and harmony, and yet Jesus is going to bring them together and bring them to a place of peace and harmony in him.
Yeah.
Good.
You talked about glory last night, and if you think about unity from the standpoint of our unity is supposed to bring God glory, whatever God does with us as Christians should be something we couldn't do ourselves. Like anybody can get other people together that already agree and put them in the same room and get them to echo the same thoughts. Part of the glory of God that's seen through our unity is these folks are all together on the same page for my name's sake, which wouldn't have been otherwise, right? And we love seeing that kind of thing. Remember the Titans, Little Giants. We love seeing people that put these various people together.
Don't open the door for Brad to start going into movie quotes. Don't do that. Hiram, what are you doing, man?
We're all not on the same page, obviously, here. But, but when that does happen, it's a glorious thing, and God gets the glory. And that's
Those rare occasions.
And this is Paul's point in Ephesians 3, if I'm understanding what's going on when he says that when the angelic powers look at what God did with Jew and Gentile together in the church, they are stunned. Like, whoa, I never saw that coming. Like, how in the world do you take natural enemies and teach them to love each other? And
Ephesians 3, 10 and 11.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's, the second half. Ephesians 2 is all about our reconciliation to God. The first half is our reconciliation to God, but also the second half is our reconciliation to one another that was broken in Genesis chapter 3. And so he is kind of synthesizing that in chapter 3, and he says, it's the manifold wisdom of God that angelic powers stand back in amazement and look at what God has done.
We need to talk about this stuff more, don't you think? I mean, it's like a lot of the unity lessons I heard growing up were more focused on we need to be united, and here's how we can tell when we're united. It was a doctrinal unity, which I'm not disparaging at all. There's no question that Ephesians 4 includes doctrinal unity in the 7 ones, 4 through 7. So we're not disparaging that. I guess we're just focusing on if we're going to have this culture of unity, it's almost something that is unspoken. It has to be comprised of attitudes. To your point, you don't have a beautiful portrait of the organ, a heart, up above the fireplace.
I think I might get one now, though.
Okay, good. Commission somebody to do that. That'll be nice. Mama Kemp, I hear, is a great artist.
She might be. She'll post it on social media when I get it.
On Hiram's behalf. Yeah, that's good. I forgot what I was saying now. What are we doing? Well, we just need to talk about this more because this is like the heart of unity. I think so much we emphasize the external to the neglect of the internal aspects of unity, and that's what motivates all the rest of this. So you've got people that come up and say stuff like, well, what do you mean, like we all have to be exactly the same? No, you misunderstood the heart of unity and the attitudes that are necessary.
Yeah, and I think sometimes we end up in trouble congregationally and individually when we fail to emphasize this aspect. Brad was talking about the reconciliation with each other. If we don't tell people and preach from Scripture that unity is hard work and it's more than just being on the same page with God, when we do have disagreements with each other and we don't see eye to eye, we won't know how to go forward because we're thinking, well, we already believe the 7 ones, we're all on the same page. Why don't I just naturally love every Christian and like everybody and see everything their way?
Wait, you're going here now. You're doing this.
And so when there are these hard conversations that we have to have and difficulties, we'll think we're the first ones or something's wrong with us, and we'll suppress the need to deal with those issues and think, well, that's not real Christian-like, can't bring up those things and deal with it, when in actuality, that's most of what the New Testament is talking about when it deals with unity, about how to get along and get together. That might be the whole background to the book of Romans, right? Jews and Gentiles in the same church and what they need to do to get along with each other. And so if it's only emphasizing doctrine, we'll think, well, we already agree on the same things. There's nothing really to do going forward here. But when we do have hang-ups and disagreements with each other, or we're difficult or other people are difficult, we'll wonder, how do we fix this? How do we merge this bridge? Or maybe something's wrong with me. But no, you're just human. In Philippians 4, Paul's talking to 2 Christian women, Euodia and Syntyche, and he basically says, I want you guys to agree in the Lord. And he brings in a third party. And I want this person to help you. Your names are in the book of life. Work things out. Get along together. They're both hard-working Christians. Both love the Lord. But for unknown reasons to us, they're at odds with each other. And we need to read passages like that, study on them, and preach them and say, this happens. But this doesn't have to upend our relationships or our congregations. We can go forward.
Yeah. How would you like to be one of those 2 women? You're like, we're meeting together today for a letter to be read from Paul and Timothy to the church, and 3/4 of the way in, like, your name gets called. It's like, oh, by the way, you 2, you need to fix this. Let's go. Okay,
great. And I'm inciting a third party to help you do this.
But that's better than
everybody's
nothing's
nightmare.
wrong.
Absolutely,
though.
exactly.
That's the thing.
Well, and it's the fact that unity exists in the heart of God, and we're called to that motivates us to even work it out to begin with. Yeah. Otherwise, we just get frustrated and we say, well, we are doing everything right. Why isn't this working? This must not be the place for me. I'm out of here.
Yeah.
Okay, so how do we create a culture of unity? Let's get down to the brass tacks and the practicality of this. Chance is the only one who prepared for this episode, and he wrote down 4 things in the document.
Yeah, I found the document that we use, and I was like, no one else
You
has put
dusted off
anything
the
here.
cobwebs
Dusted off
and-
the cobwebs. Put some thoughts in there that may or may not be helpful.
So we'll let you get this kicked off. And the first thing you said, I don't know if you got it pulled up there, has to do with pride. What do you got?
Yeah, so the first thing, as I was thinking about creating a culture of unity, is what to avoid. And so, I mean, it's still talking about heart characteristics, but I guess here's the negative one. So if we're going to build a culture of unity in our relationships and in the congregation where we worship and serve, then we have to avoid pride. You know, I'm thinking about Proverbs 13:10. Solomon says, only by pride comes contention or strife or division. So disunity and disharmony, Solomon says, you take it down to its root, and pride is the source of that. And so we've got to then work to avoid pride in our own heart. Like, we can't let that root grow there, or it's going to cause disunity and disharmony. You see it in the church at Corinth, the opening chapters. Paul's writing to them because he doesn't want division to exist there, but they are puffed up. And part of that has to do, in chapter 8, he says, knowledge can puff up. Right? So we can be full of doctrinal knowledge, but if we don't guard against a heart of pride, then that can puff us up, and the result of that is division, which is the exact opposite of what we're trying to and striving to create.
Yeah, I think Romans 12 is another chapter where Paul's going to go into being unified, and as Brad was mentioning, all the gifts and all of that. But Paul says first, don't think more highly of yourself than you ought to think in verse 3, but to deal soberly and think right, as God has dealt to every man the measure of faith. And so in the church, if we think about it from this vantage point, everybody that's in Christ that I'm supposed to be unified with is a sinner that's been saved by grace through faith, is somebody who responded to the gospel that Jesus and God and the Spirit had worked out before the foundation of the world. Like, we didn't earn this. This wasn't drawn up. This wasn't our plan. And really, no matter how long you've been a Christian, that doesn't make you better than anybody, or even mean that you necessarily do Christianity better than others, and so you get more say. And I think that crucifies that pride that Chance is talking about. Just knowing where we stand in relationship to God. You don't have any more of God's love than anybody, or any less of it. And so you can do the hard work of working with your brethren to be together.
I think it is about starting with ourselves.
Brad has 3 points now. He has notes.
I know he's
Look at that.
making notes over there.
Every so often. It's starting with the self. It's like the old quote that says, "Everyone thinks of changing the world. No one thinks of changing himself." Unity starts right here. And it's we have to understand that many times the biggest struggle to unity is the person who looks back at us in the mirror. That when I try to impose my own will, or I want things, or I think, sometimes we look and say, can you believe what they did? I really even stop to think about how my actions and words are translating to other people. What are they communicating? And even if nobody else around is going to take that spirit, it does not justify me not having it.
Yeah.
Like, we have to take extreme ownership of the fact that God has called us to this. And
As much as depends on you, live at peace.
Exactly.
Yeah. I was going to ask, don't you think pride is difficult to self-diagnose? And I don't know, a lot of the issues that I've been aware of, I mean, maybe there's some issues of contention, right, among Christians. Maybe there's some doctrinal issues there, but for the most part, it's just been because of something that really is relatively small, but it was magnified in somebody's heart. They weren't willing to budge. The other side wasn't willing to budge, and the next thing you know, they're moving to the other congregation or something, right? I mean,
I think everybody, for sure. And one example, we don't have to go down this trail, but like 2020, we all thought we were unified and everybody was the same and we all believed the same thing. And 2020 kind of revealed, with all of the things that went on there, that we've got some pride, and I'm smarter, I know this, and we should do things my way. And it was just a difficult time, and it gave us an opportunity, if we were willing, to exercise some of this stuff we're talking about, patience, long-suffering, and all of that. I don't know if we passed or failed the test, but it shows us who we really are. And in the end, a lot of that stuff wasn't doctrinal as much as it was just our heart disposition and who we think we are in relationship to God and to each other.
And I mean, Diotrephes wreaked havoc in a congregation because he had this spirit of pride, right? 3 John 9 and 10, he loved to have the preeminence. And because of that, just a culture in a congregation that people didn't want to be a part of because he was just, it was his way or nothing else. And so it's avoiding pride in our own heart. That's where it starts, right? Looking in the mirror and thinking about, where am I? And pleading with God to help me destroy my pride and build there a sense of lowliness and humility that's willing to be changed and grown.
Yeah.
So I think this is the most dangerous thing about religious pride, is that we can not only convince other people, but we can convince ourselves. We can cloak our pride in standing for righteousness. I'm upholding. No, I don't. It's not that I dislike this person. It's I have a problem with what they teach. No, it's that you dislike them. But you see how you can convince yourself, no, that's not what it's about. It's not really about that. And so I can just say, no, it's about a matter of truth. So I don't have to examine my heart. I can just keep focused on them. When as before, if we spent as much time beforehand examining our heart and what is motivating us to go to and to talk through this issue as we did actually talking about the issue, we'd be in a lot better shape. That said, why am I going to you? Like, if I'm going to be honest here, why am I bothered by you? What is it? Is it something that I'm misinterpreting? Am I wrong here? And being brutally honest with that, and allowing other people to be brutally honest with us and speak the truth into our life and say, hey, from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you're jealous. And so, but that's the danger of religious pride, because you can cloak it in something else and pass it off.
Scribes and Pharisees much?
Exactly.
You know? Okay, put a pin in this for just a second, lest we're misunderstood and people write us angry emails. There is a point at which people do break fellowship with God and thus with God's people. There is such a thing as teaching that would thus result in that, and that must be, withstood. At the same time, I think the point that at least I'm making is more often than not, the issues that plague our congregations are not that extreme. It's just an issue of pride. Is that a fair way to sort of button that up and give the balanced caveat? I don't want anybody thinking bad of Hiram.
Well, and part of that, too, is...
we got to protect Hiram's image.
That's true.
It's true.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Even when that division, that break has to be made and recognized, that should be done in the sense of what Paul would say in Philippians 3, I tell you now, even weeping, they're enemies of the cross.
Wow.
Like, it's not a...
It should be done with a broken heart.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Not a, I found them and I rooted them out.
Right.
No, that means we lost them. That's a devastating moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what you were saying, Brad, about if somebody is not holding to the truth, we don't use religious pride as an excuse. Like, hey, I was kind until he started teaching false doctrine. Like, even if, no matter what they do, no matter
Then I went on money changers on them. Yeah.
I don't know what money changers is, but yeah.
Flipping the tables, man.
Okay.
Yeah. There was this time, Hiram, when Jesus went into the temple.
Thank you.
Okay.
If you haven't read that.
We'll talk about
that
it
in the
off
Old
the
or
air.
New?
He's an Old
I
Testament
think it's
guy.
in the New, but it has something to do with the Old. I don't
I'm
understand
an Old Testament
it.
dude.
Oh, that's what it you were saying?
I don't know the Bible. I forgot.
Okay.
But yeah, don't do that.
This is great. Okay. Avoiding pride. Chance, what else if we're going to create a culture of unity? We'll get back around in a minute. 9 minutes left.
9 minutes. We got this.
Yeah.
We have to be Jesus-centered. I mean, you think about Ephesians, or you think about John 17, the prayer that we're thinking about in the conference. Unity, oneness is at the heart of what Jesus is praying, because it's at the heart of who Jesus is and what he's in the world to accomplish. Ephesians 2:14, he is our peace. And so we're not going to have peace and unity if we're not Jesus-centric in what we do and what we teach and how we teach. And so we've got to keep our eyes on Jesus and our focus on him. So we can't emphasize Jesus too much in our preaching, in our life. It's just not possible.
Yeah, I think otherwise it becomes like unifying around me and what I think. If we unify around Jesus, most people, Christians are trying to follow Christ, and if you can show them honestly, hey, this is what Jesus wants you to do, that's one thing. But when you start showing them things like, hey, in order to be right with God, you've got to see it my way, well, that's where you're going to have problems. And if we can stay Christ-centered, and whenever Paul's dealing with churches about unity, 1 Corinthians 1:10, Ephesians 4, Philippians 2, in these passages, he's always driving people back to Jesus, not even to himself, like, do it because I say this. He's saying, hey, remember what Jesus has done and stay focused on Jesus. And if you do that, that's where you can really have biblical unity.
No, you're right. Jesus is the heart and center of every epistle of the New Testament. It's interesting just to make that walkthrough. It's like, okay, I'm reading through Romans and 1 Corinthians, and I'm looking at here's what the church at Corinth is struggling with, and how does Paul answer that? He takes them back to Jesus. And he says, I want to show you Jesus and him crucified. And he keeps their eyes on Jesus. And so that's where our eyes have to be if we're going to create a culture of unity.
It's hard to be prideful when you're looking at Jesus, too.
He helps you develop that same mindset, Philippians 2:5, of humility.
Yeah. All right. How about being willing to work at something? The unifiers are usually the people who are busy people. But I think specifically, Chance, you had this down, being willing to work. You're over in Romans 12, as much as depends on you, be at peace with all men. There's some work required in
absolutely
being at peace.
Yeah. And as much as lies within you, that means you're making every effort. And I think that's what the word endeavoring means there in Ephesians 4 and verse 3. The Christian Standard Bible translates it, making every effort. So and the term is in other places in the New Testament translated with the concept of diligence. So you're giving everything that you have to make peace. Now, I'm reminded of what Jesus says in Luke 17 as he's talking to his disciples, and he says, it's impossible but that offenses are coming. Like, that's going to happen. People are going to be offended. But, he says, you make certain and you take heed to yourself that you're not the root cause of that. That you're not the one who's constantly sticking your foot out to trip up your brethren. And so he says, you be willing to work and you do everything that you can, not to be a cause of disunity, but you do everything that you can to live at peace. Some people won't allow it, but he says it's not on you because you're giving every effort to be at peace with everyone.
Yeah.
All I could think about was Justin Pascal trying to trip me 3 times last night.
Whoa. Wow.
No, literally trip me, not like to sin or anything.
Yeah, that's good. We don't need to bring out a millstone or anything.
Yeah, we're good. We're good.
Hang on. There was this time, Hiram, in Scripture.
Jesus told a story.
I've never heard of that as the money changer story.
What are you doing?
You went all money changers
When
on them?
else
Where is
does
that?
the Bible
When is
talk
that?
about money changers?
I don't know. I thought you were talking about a movie or something. I'm like, I've never seen that before. What is the Money Changers movie?
Hiram stays up with
Now,
pop
back
culture.
to what Chan said intelligently a moment ago.
Okay, good.
Like, we talk about sometimes needing to break off from people doctrinally, whether that be congregations or individuals, and that whole idea of endeavoring to keep the unity. Before we sever ties with anybody or any group, we should ask ourselves, in light of Ephesians 4:3, did we or did I do everything possible to maintain unity? Have I gone across the fence and done everything I could before we had to sever ties, and even then still do it with the Spirit of Jesus? I think sometimes on the first notice of somebody saying something weird or strange or even doing something out of bounds, we're like, well, they've gone to the left or even to the far right and we're done with them. But have we endeavored to keep the spirit of unity and maintain it? Or have we just said, well, they've fallen out and so it's over with? It's on us. Again, we can't make people do things, but have we done everything we could to maintain unity and exhausted every measure possible in order to keep what Jesus died for us to have?
Yeah, sometimes it feels like we're just sitting on the edge of critique and criticism. It's like, I've just been waiting for you. You finally did it. Now I can cut you off and we can be done. But it should be the opposite.
Yeah. Now I've got this long list of why you've been suspect in my mind for
correct.
the last 5 years.
And now I can verify it and check it off. And
Yeah.
And if you go with that attitude, believe me, if you want to find something wrong with somebody, you will find it. If
you're not even wearing socks.
Exactly. If I mean,
You were right on the edge of critique and
Absolutely.
criticism.
I've been ready.
Can y'all pray for me, please? Like all the people that are live. Y'all see what I'm dealing with? I'm glad it's live so everybody can see it.
Usually we can't see Brad's socks.
That's correct.
it's true.
He doesn't have anything to see.
Brad, you were saying, I'm sorry.
I don't even know. And,
Okay.
No, if you look for something, you will find it, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And so we have to be cautious that having a disposition really of suspicion of people. Mm-hmm. That is, and a lot of times when people are overly suspicious, it's going to sound contradictory. It makes me suspicious of them because we tend to.
I know you are, but what am I?
Exactly, and we tend to reveal ourselves in what we obsess about. I'm suspect of you. I'm suspect of everybody. Are you a person we should be suspect of? Like sometimes the sins we bark about the most are the sins we struggle with the most. And we should pay close attention to that with some people.
Yeah. In congregational life, I think that in preacher circles that we're running in, and we're thinking about unity on a brotherhood scale. In congregational life, are there as many people who are suspicious of others, or is it just a matter of like, hey, I want to be the person who's in charge of this event or that event, or it seems like Brother so-and-so is always called upon to lead the opening prayer. I mean, are these issues of unity, or are they just petty disagreements? I mean, I'm not trying to make too much out of them. I'm just trying to bring this down to a level of normal people, not just
I think
us.
they could be issues of unity, but I think from my experiences, especially with churches in the South, a lot of the disunity that exists are old family strifes.
I thought you were about to say college football. Okay.
No. I'm an Ole Miss fan. I'm not even going to argue that we're better.
Wow. That's going to do it for this edition of Four Preachers.
But really, you get into those old, like, I've heard people say, oh, well, they would never be members here because their family and this family, like, their grandparents had this beef with each other.
And they couldn't even tell you what the beef is anymore.
No, couldn't tell you anything about it. And that's the disunity. Oh, and sometimes going in and being a local preacher at a place, you go in and you see people with fresh eyes. You have no history to work with. You just see people for who they are. Other people, they cannot let other people get over their past. They still associate them with things they've done in the past and not who they are in the present. Mm-hmm. And that is a very detrimental thing to unity.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also think, I guess there's this famous Abraham Lincoln quote. Somebody was talking about somebody he didn't like, and Abraham Lincoln says, well, I don't know that man. I must get to know him better. I don't like him. I must get to know him better. I think some of our division is we just don't know each other as well as we should. And if we spend more time around each other, we become sympathetic to each other's differences. Oh, that's why he's done that, or that's why she views things that way. And if we stop viewing church just as a business transaction where we come in, and check out, we will foster a familial attitude, and that will lead to unity. I don't think it's always somebody wanting to run the show. We just really don't know each other on the deep level that it takes to really do life together and even eternity together.
Good.
And I think that's one of our challenges.
Yeah.
Yep.
Final thoughts, Chance? Yeah.
Exactly.
Chance, you stuck in all the way, bro.
I did. I stuck in all the way. Me and you, we're there.
Hiram's referring to the button collar. Yeah. I don't know how you do that. I don't know how you've done it either.
We're making that.
Anyway, Four Preachers in a Podcast releases on Fridays from TheLightNetwork.tv or wherever you get your favorite podcast. Check us out on YouTube as well. Just search Four Preachers in a Podcast or The Light Network. I think this is the first episode when we haven't recommended a zillion books. I'm disappointed in us. Anyway.
The Bible.
Thanks, everybody, for being a part of this episode. And thanks, all of you, for getting up early with us and checking some time out with us. Stay cool.